It was a quiet evening, the kind that settled gently after a long week. The sky outside had turned a soft blue-gray, and the living room was filled with the gentle hum of our favorite show playing in the background. We had just returned from a walk around the neighborhood, hand in hand, exchanging light conversation about nothing in particular. I remember feeling a rare sense of calm, a rare sense of closeness that had felt a little distant in recent months. As we settled on the couch, I asked him what he wanted for dinner. He shrugged and smiled, telling me to choose whatever I wanted. Then he handed me his phone so I could place the order. I opened the delivery app, scrolling through our usual choices. Just as I was about to add something to the cart, a notification appeared at the top of the screen. It was a message from a woman whose name I did not recognize. The preview was short, but it was more than enough. Last night was amazing. I cannot wait to see you again. My fingers stopped moving. My heart did not. In that moment, dinner was the last thing on my mind, because I knew my marriage had just ended. We met in the most ordinary way, at a coffee shop where I used to spend my Saturday mornings reading and planning my week. He walked in, ordered a drink, and noticed the book in my hand. It sparked a conversation, and before I knew it, we had been talking for over an hour. He was charming in a quiet, thoughtful way. There was no flashy introduction, no overly rehearsed lines, just a calm presence that made me feel seen. After that day, we started meeting regularly. It felt natural, like we were two pieces that had been missing each other without even realizing it. Our relationship moved quickly, but it never felt rushed. We traveled together, visited small towns and quiet beaches, and dreamed of a future filled with shared goals and family traditions. I had always imagined a love that felt safe, and with him, that was exactly what I believed I had found. He listened when I spoke, remembered the little things I mentioned in passing, and made me feel like I mattered. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes with a heart full of certainty. I did not question it. He was everything I thought I had been waiting for. In the early days of our marriage, we built a life that others often admired. We decorated our first apartment with mismatched furniture and second-hand finds, laughing as we assembled tables late into the night. We supported each other through job changes, stressful deadlines, and family dramas. He held my hand through the loss of my grandmother and sent flowers to my office after I received a promotion. I believed we were a team. That belief was the foundation of every decision I made. When he received an opportunity in another city, I did not hesitate. I left behind my career, one I had worked hard to build, because I trusted in our future. I told myself it was temporary, that I would find something new, something even better. My family was not happy about the move. They worried I was giving up too much, but I reassured them. He needed me, and I loved him. I believed that love meant sacrifice. I had no regrets at the time. In the beginning, he seemed to appreciate everything I did. He complimented the meals I cooked, the effort I made to turn our new apartment into a home, and the patience I had while adjusting to life in a new city. He told his friends how lucky he was to have me. I took comfort in that. I needed to believe I was not invisible, that what I was doing for us mattered. I convinced myself that his occasional silence, his long hours at work, and his growing preoccupation with his phone were normal. Life was busy. Stressful. That was what I told myself. There were moments that did not feel quite right, but I brushed them aside. The way he would hesitate before answering questions. The nights he would come home later than expected and have vague explanations that never seemed worth pushing back on. I did not want to become the kind of wife who checked his phone or questioned his every move. I wanted to be the kind of wife who trusted. And I did. I reminded myself that every couple goes through rough patches. That love required understanding and patience. And so I stayed patient. He stopped asking about my day as often. Our conversations became shorter, filled with practical details instead of shared dreams. I tried to fill the silence with effort. I planned weekend getaways, suggested new hobbies we could try together, and made excuses for him when friends asked why he was not around. When I started looking for work again, he seemed indifferent. He said he wanted me to be happy but made little effort to help or support the process. Still, I believed he was just overwhelmed, that it had nothing to do with us. Our daily routine gave the impression of a stable, loving marriage. We woke up together, shared breakfast when time allowed, and exchanged light kisses before parting ways. We sent quick text messages during the day, little check-ins that had become habit more than anything heartfelt. Evenings were spent watching shows or eating takeout, sometimes in silence, sometimes with quiet laughter. There were still good days. Days when he would surprise me with my favorite coffee or hold me a little longer before we fell asleep. Those moments were what I clung to. They gave me hope that whatever had shifted between us could still be repaired. I remember thinking that perhaps we had just fallen into a routine, that maybe the spark had dulled under the weight of adult responsibilities. I believed that all couples went through phases like this, and it was only a matter of time before things felt new again. I bought new clothes, changed my hair, and worked harder to be interesting. I laughed at his jokes even when I did not find them funny, and I stopped talking about my own frustrations because I did not want to add pressure. I believed I was being supportive. I believed I was being loving. Looking back, I see the imbalance clearly. I gave more than I should have. I quieted my own needs, made myself smaller to keep the peace, and took on the emotional labor of holding us together. He never asked me to do those things directly, but his indifference made it clear that he would not meet me halfway. And still, I stayed. Because the version of us I carried in my heart was built on years of memories and moments that once felt real. I wanted so badly to believe that the man I married was still somewhere inside the person I now shared a home with. The hardest part of betrayal is not the act itself. It is the realization that while you were busy believing in a shared future, the person beside you was building a different reality behind your back. I did not know then how deep the cracks in our foundation truly were. I only knew that I loved him. I trusted him. And I was willing to keep trying, even as everything around me began to quietly fall apart. It began with small shifts that were almost too subtle to notice at first. He would pick up his phone and tilt it slightly away from me, not in an obvious way, but enough that I started to notice the change. He used to leave his phone on the coffee table or the kitchen counter, untouched for hours while we enjoyed time together. Now it was always within his reach, face down, vibrating silently with messages he never mentioned. He told me work had picked up, that his team was understaffed and the deadlines were tighter than ever. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I told myself that if the roles were reversed, he would extend me the same grace. The late nights started shortly after. At first it was once a week, then twice, then nearly every night. He claimed to be catching up at the office, or grabbing drinks with colleagues. When he came home, he would be distracted, distant. Sometimes I could still smell the cologne he rarely wore unless he was going out. Other times, he would slip into the shower immediately, brushing off any attempt I made to ask about his day. He always had an answer, and I never had proof. So I let it go. The intimacy we once shared began to fade, slowly at first, until it became almost non-existent. There were no more random kisses in the kitchen, no lingering touches as we passed each other in the hallway. When I reached for his hand, he would sometimes pull away too quickly. When I asked if he wanted to go out for dinner or take a short trip to reconnect, he would say he was too tired, or that money was tight, or that we could plan something next month. But next month never came. We started arguing over the most trivial things. The laundry not being folded. The groceries not being restocked. Whether I had reminded him about a bill. The smallest comments would set him off. His tone became sharper, his patience thinner. I found myself apologizing for things I did not even understand, simply to keep the peace. I kept telling myself that he was just stressed. I repeated his excuses like mantras. Work was demanding, his boss was difficult, the pressure was temporary. I reminded myself that we had been through rough patches before and made it out stronger. Still, something deep inside me began to ache with doubt. I questioned myself constantly. Was I being too sensitive? Too clingy? Too suspicious? I analyzed every interaction, every sigh, every glance at his phone. When I mentioned my concerns, he would dismiss them with a tired sigh and tell me I was overthinking again. Sometimes he would laugh it off and accuse me of watching too many dramas. I began to wonder if I was the problem. If I had somehow become unlovable without realizing it. To fix what I thought I had broken, I threw myself into the relationship with renewed energy. I planned date nights with his favorite foods. I bought tickets to shows he had once said he wanted to see. I made small gifts, left notes in his work bag, sent thoughtful messages throughout the day. I told myself that if I gave more, he would respond. That he would see how hard I was trying and remember what we once had. But he remained cold. The more I tried, the more distant he became. It was like reaching out for someone standing behind glass, so close, yet impossibly out of reach. He stopped asking about my day. When I spoke, he would nod without really listening, eyes still fixed on his phone. His laughter, once warm and frequent, became rare. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing week. I started dreading the evenings, the quiet dinners, the way he would sit across from me and make me feel completely alone. I felt like a ghost in my own home, lingering in the spaces we once filled with love. My friends began to notice the change. They asked gentle questions, not wanting to intrude. One of them mentioned how he never seemed to show up anymore, how he always had a reason to skip gatherings. My sister asked if I was happy. I smiled and gave half-truths, not ready to admit what I was beginning to suspect. I did not want anyone to see the cracks I was working so hard to hide. Admitting it to them would have meant admitting it to myself. Even my mother, who had always been supportive, began to grow quiet during our phone calls. She would ask how I was feeling, if I was getting enough rest. When I told her we were just going through a busy season, she paused and said, "Busy is one thing, but neglect is another." Her words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. I still remember the night I stayed up, watching the hours slip by, waiting for him to come home. He had said he was meeting a client for dinner, but he never called, never texted. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, heart pounding with a quiet kind of panic that had no name. When he finally walked through the door well past midnight, he looked surprised to see me awake. I asked if everything was all right, and he looked at me like I was being unreasonable. He said I was acting dramatic, that I needed to trust him. But trust is not something that lives in empty words, it lives in consistency, in presence, in truth. As much as I wanted to believe him, I felt something inside me shifting. The woman who once waited patiently began to feel tired. Tired of pretending not to notice. Tired of explaining his absence to others. Tired of shrinking herself just to make room for someone who no longer seemed to want to be there. Still, I held on. Because love, when it is real, does not disappear overnight. It lingers, even in the silence, even in the absence. I was still hoping he would reach back across the growing distance between us. I was still hoping to find the man I had married beneath the stranger who now shared my bed. My fingers hovered above the screen, the brightness from the phone casting a strange glow across my face in the dim light of our living room. The message blinked there like an accusation, impossible to unsee. "Last night was amazing. I cannot wait to see you again." My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the name, unfamiliar, no mutual connections, just a first name followed by a heart emoji. My heart began to pound, and for a moment I sat completely still, the soft hum of the television playing in the background, a soundtrack to the destruction of everything I thought I knew. I did not open the food delivery app. My appetite had vanished. My hands, trembling slightly, tapped into the message thread. I told myself I was just looking for an explanation, a misunderstanding, something to make this make sense. But each message I read chipped away at the wall I had built to protect myself. They had pet names. They shared inside jokes. There were photos, one of her in a mirror, one of them at a rooftop bar I had never been to. The timestamp was from a night he had told me he was working late at the office. Scrolling further, I found screenshots of hotel reservations. Messages with room numbers. Thank you texts from her the next morning. One said, "You always make me feel so special. I hate when you have to go back to her." I could not breathe. My body was frozen, but my mind was spinning. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to wake up and discover this was some kind of nightmare. But it was all real. The proof was right there, spelled out in messages and photos and moments he had stolen from our life to give to someone else. I did not know how long I sat there, staring into that tiny screen as if it held all the answers I never wanted. I heard him in the kitchen, opening the fridge, pouring a drink. I did not even look up when he walked into the living room. He smiled at me casually, as if everything was normal. As if he had not just handed me the key to the truth I had been afraid to name. I looked at him, holding the phone tightly, my voice trembling as I said his name. He raised an eyebrow, confused. I showed him the message, just the first one. I did not speak. I just watched his face as he read it. The way his expression shifted, from surprise, to alarm, to a kind of forced calm. He reached out, tried to take the phone from my hand, but I pulled it back. I asked him slowly, carefully, if there was something he wanted to tell me. He hesitated. I saw it, the panic flicker in his eyes before he masked it behind that same tired excuse. He said it was nothing. A misunderstanding. Someone playing a joke. Then, when I said her name and quoted more of their messages, his tone changed. He grew defensive, annoyed. He said I had no right to go through his messages. That I was being dramatic. That this was not what it looked like. He tried to minimize it, to twist the narrative, but the evidence was too clear. Asked him again. I demanded the truth. My voice broke as I did, but I held my ground. His shoulders slumped. He exhaled and admitted it had been going on for a while. I asked him how long. He looked away. A few months, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I knew it had to be longer. I felt something inside me crack. Not like the shatter of glass, but the slow, agonizing splintering of something precious. I was not ready for the pain that followed. It was not just anger or betrayal. It was a deep, soul-crushing sorrow. A weight pressing on my chest so heavy I felt like I might fall to the floor and never rise again. I asked him why. He did not answer. He said things had been hard between us. That I had been distant. That he did not feel appreciated. I could barely believe what I was hearing. All those nights I had cooked his favorite meals, planned date nights, stayed up waiting for him. Was that not appreciation? Was my loyalty not enough? I asked him if he loved her. He said he did not know. I asked if he still loved me. He said he was confused. My heart broke all over again. The tears came in waves. Hot, silent, relentless. I could barely see through them, but I did not try to stop them. I needed them. I needed to let it out. All the pain and confusion and fury that had been boiling beneath the surface for months. I asked him how he could do this to me, after everything we had built. After all the sacrifices I had made. He looked down, ashamed, or maybe just caught. He said he did not mean for it to happen. That he never wanted to hurt me. But he had hurt me. In ways he could not possibly understand. He had taken our life and twisted it into a lie. Every kiss, every promise, every quiet evening spent in each other's arms. Now it all felt tainted. I no longer knew what was real and what was just a cover for his betrayal. He asked me not to overreact. He said we could talk about it. That we could fix it. That he was sorry. But his words meant nothing now. They were empty, too late, too shallow to fill the void he had created. My whole body trembled with disbelief. I felt like I was unraveling from the inside out. I could not listen anymore. I could not sit in that room with him 1 second longer. I stood up. My knees felt weak, my chest tight. I needed air. I needed space. I grabbed my coat and walked toward the door. He called after me, but I did not turn back. The house that once felt warm and full of memories now felt suffocating, hollow. I opened the door and stepped outside into the night, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I walked down the street with no destination in mind, only one thought echoing in my heart. I could not breathe. The first few nights after I walked out of the house felt like stepping into a different reality, one where everything I had believed in no longer existed. Sleep became impossible. My body was exhausted, but my mind would not stop racing. I lay in the dark, watching shadows move across the ceiling, my thoughts spinning in endless circles. One moment, I was filled with sorrow so deep it felt like drowning. The next, I was overwhelmed by anger that made my hands shake. I kept asking myself how I had ended up here, how the man I had trusted with my heart could do something so cruel. I cried until I felt empty. Then I cried some more. I would pick up my phone to call him, just to scream or beg for an explanation, and then I would stop myself. I deleted and retyped messages 100 times. I never sent them. Instead, I started writing everything down in a journal, every thought, every memory, every question. It was the only way I could make sense of the chaos inside me. I filled pages with heartbreak, confusion, and the aching silence that had replaced the love I once felt so certain about. I reached out to my closest friend and told her everything. Her voice cracked when she said she was sorry, and then she asked me to come stay with her. For the first time in days, I let myself be held. I let someone else carry a piece of the pain. We sat up late into the night, drinking tea, not talking much, just sitting together. She reminded me that I was not alone, that I was still loved, even if it felt like everything was falling apart. Eventually, I made the decision to speak with a therapist. I needed someone to help me untangle the emotional knots that had formed in my chest. Our sessions became a lifeline. I cried through most of the first one, barely able to speak. But slowly, with each visit, I began to peel back the layers of guilt and shame that had settled over me. She helped me see that the betrayal was not my fault, that I had done everything I could to be a good partner, that his choices belonged to him, not to me. Flashbacks would hit me at random. I would be brushing my teeth and suddenly remember a night he came home late and kissed me like everything was normal. I would be walking through a grocery store and see a brand of wine we used to drink together, and I would remember the night we celebrated our anniversary, not knowing he had already begun seeing her. Every memory I cherished now felt poisoned. It was like looking through a photo album that had been rewritten with invisible ink. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt true. I wrestled for weeks with the question of whether to stay or leave. Part of me wanted to believe we could fix it, that he would beg for forgiveness and somehow rebuild the trust he had shattered. But the deeper I looked, the clearer it became that the foundation of our marriage had been crumbling long before that message appeared. I saw now all the ways I had ignored the signs, how I had silenced my own doubts to keep the peace. I realized I had been fighting for a version of us that no longer existed. I began gathering everything I needed to protect myself. Financial records, messages, photos, anything that could be useful if things turned difficult. I was not sure what kind of divorce this would become, but I knew I had to be prepared. I visited a lawyer, asked questions, took notes, and for the first time in a long time, felt a small flicker of control returning. It did not make the pain go away, but it gave me direction. A path forward. Telling my family was another challenge. My mother wept when I told her. My father sat in silence for a long time, then simply said he was sorry. They had both loved him, welcomed him as their own. Their disappointment was layered over their sorrow for me. His family's response was colder. His sister was shocked, said she had no idea, but I could hear something guarded in her voice. His parents offered their sympathy, but it felt formal, detached. I realized then how little I really knew about their inner dynamics. How much of our life together had been built on surface harmony and quiet avoidance. I had emotional breakdowns that came without warning. A song on the radio, the smell of his cologne lingering on an old shirt, a couple holding hands on the street, each one could send me spiraling. But there were also moments of clarity, brief and precious. Times when I looked at myself in the mirror and saw strength where there had once been only pain. I began to understand that healing was not a straight line. It was a long, messy, often brutal journey. But it was mine to walk, and I was walking it step by step. I started reclaiming my space. I went back to our home when he was not there and packed up my belongings. I put on music, opened the windows, and took my time. Each item I boxed up felt like a piece of myself I was rescuing. I found old photographs and cried over them, but I did not keep them. I chose to leave behind what no longer served me. I changed my number. I blocked him on every platform. It felt dramatic, but it was necessary. I needed distance. I needed peace. Returning to work helped. It gave me a rhythm, a reason to get out of bed. My colleagues noticed I was quieter, but they were kind. I threw myself into projects, stayed busy. The distraction was a relief. In the evenings, I wrote in my journal. I began each entry with one thing I had done for myself that day, no matter how small. Some days it was simply getting dressed. Other days it was going for a walk or cooking a meal I used to enjoy. These little acts of self-care became lifelines. Proof that I was still here. Still standing. There was a day, weeks after everything fell apart, when I looked out the window and realized the world had kept going. The sun still rose. The birds still sang. Life had not ended, even if mine had changed forever. And in that realization, there was something close to hope. Not forgiveness, not yet. Not forgetting. But the knowledge that I had survived the worst night of my life, and I was still breathing. I had begun to pick up the pieces, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. And somewhere in that quiet strength, I knew I would be all right. Eventually, I made the decision to end the marriage. It did not come in one dramatic moment, but rather in a series of quiet, painful realizations. I had given everything I could to that relationship. My time, my trust, my heart. And in the end, it had not been enough to stop him from betraying me. I kept thinking back to the moment he handed me his phone so casually, not knowing it would change everything. That gesture had shattered my world, but it had also set me free. Once I understood that, I knew I could not stay. Divorce was not a failure. It was my choice to stop participating in a lie. Filing the paperwork brought a strange mix of grief and relief. I felt the finality of it in my bones. There was no going back. But there was also a weight that lifted from my chest. I was choosing myself. I was choosing peace over pretending. I continued with therapy, not just to heal from the betrayal but to understand why I had tolerated so much less than I deserved for so long. The process was difficult. It forced me to look inward, to examine the ways I had silenced my own needs for the sake of harmony. I had believed that love meant sacrificing parts of myself. Now I was learning that real love, the kind that lasts, begins with self-respect. I started doing things I had once loved but had abandoned over the years. I joined a local art class, picked up my old sketchbook, and let my hands move across the paper without worrying about whether the result was perfect. I began taking morning walks in the park with no destination, letting the silence calm my racing thoughts. I spent time in bookstores, lingered over cups of coffee, and allowed myself the simple joy of doing nothing at all. These quiet moments were like stitching pieces of myself back together. I was not trying to become someone new. I was remembering who I had always been. Eventually, I found a support group for women who had experienced infidelity. The first time I walked into that room, I felt raw and exposed. I sat in a circle of strangers and listened to their stories, and it was like hearing echoes of my own pain. Some had been married for decades. Others had children. Some were still undecided about whether to stay. But we all shared the same deep wound. There was comfort in that solidarity. I was not crazy. I was not overreacting. I was not alone. We talked about the signs we had missed, the excuses we had made, the nights we had cried ourselves to sleep while pretending everything was fine. We shared strategies for rebuilding, tips for legal protection, and moments of lightness that reminded us life could still be beautiful. I found myself offering support as well, speaking to new members and telling them what I had needed to hear in those early days, that survival is possible. That pain does not last forever. That strength often looks like simply getting out of bed and choosing to keep going. One night, after one of these meetings, I sat in my car and thought about all the ways I had lost myself in that marriage. I had stopped speaking up. I had stopped dreaming for myself. I had shrunk to fit the version of me he was most comfortable with, quiet, agreeable, always understanding. But in doing so, I had erased my own voice. It took betrayal to wake me up, to shake me from the illusion that love should hurt, or that loyalty meant enduring emotional starvation. I realized then that I had been lonely for a long time, even when I was not alone. With time, I began to feel whole again. Not in the way I had been before the betrayal, but in a new way, stronger, wiser, more grounded. I no longer looked for closure in his words or explanations. I did not need him to validate my pain or offer apologies he could not mean. I found closure in my own growth, in my own quiet triumphs. I began saying no to things that drained me. I set boundaries without guilt. I chose friendships that nourished me and distanced myself from people who only took. I started journaling not just to process pain, but to celebrate progress. I wrote letters to myself, reminding the woman in the mirror that she had survived something soul-crushing and still managed to stand tall. I wrote down the red flags I would never ignore again. I made lists of the qualities I would look for in any future relationship: honesty, emotional availability, mutual respect. And I promised myself I would never again settle for less than I deserved, no matter how long it took to find someone worthy. Sometimes I would get messages from other women, friends of friends, who had heard my story and wanted to talk. They asked how I had known, how I had left, how I had begun again. I told them the truth, that it had been painful and terrifying and lonely, but also that it had been liberating. I reminded them that intuition is not weakness, that silence in a relationship often hides more than just indifference. I encouraged them to pay attention to their own voices, even when the world tries to convince them they are overreacting. I told them they deserved love that feels like safety, not suspense. I will not say I am thankful for what happened, but I am thankful for what it taught me. I learned how to rebuild from ashes. I learned that letting go is not giving up, it is making room for something better. I learned that my worth is not tied to someone else's ability to recognize it. I learned how to protect my heart without hardening it. And above all, I learned that peace is worth more than any illusion of perfection. One evening, I was sitting in my new apartment, just beginning to feel the warmth of a new life settling in. A friend stopped by with takeout, and as we sat on the couch laughing about nothing in particular, I realized how far I had come. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, no second-guessing. There was only ease, joy, lightness. I kept thinking back to that night he handed me his phone, so casually, asking me to order dinner. He did not realize what he was doing in that moment. But I did. He handed me his phone to order dinner. He did not realize he was handing me my freedom.